start off, why did you originally run for recorder in Maricopa County?
In part opportunity because Maricopa County had been a long Republican dominated county that had started shifting into a little more of a competitive status. And so there are a number of county-wide seats, and two of them had recently been surrendered to Democrats, which was the sheriff. And Joe Arpaio had lost that, and then the recorder, the Republican recorder, had lost to Adrian Fontes. And so that sort of teed it up in terms of it was a race that the Republican Party was interested in. I was involved with the Arizona Republican Party and with the Maricopa County Republican Party, a longtime participant in the right of center politics, right of center ideas, alumnus of American Enterprise Institute, Cato Institute, Federalist Society, et cetera, et cetera. But what was attractive about the office was that it combined three things that I cared about. The first was politics. Obviously, it oversees political subject matter, and you're elected for office, so it's inherently political. And the second was management, in that it's an office of about 150 full-time employees. And so part of this is just making the organization run well. And I have a background in business, and it's something that I'm passionate about and something that I really enjoy. And so that component was appealing. And then the third is law, and that's something I also have a background in. And ultimately, the recorder's office is supposed to implement statute and is supposed to hew exactly to statute. And so I thought that was a nice combination of my interest, and the Arizona Republican Party expressed some interest in having me do it. It was county-wide, and in Arizona, Maricopa County makes up about 60% of the population of the state of Arizona. So if you can win a county-wide office, then you're off to a great start in the state of Arizona. And so, maybe that doesn't sound like the most high-minded answer, but I did appreciate both the dynamics of the office, the skill sets required, and then also the opportunity. What I probably had less of a, well, I certainly couldn't have predicted, but just some of these, I would say, core fights, core concepts, such as you know, being able to register to vote, being able to vote. I didn't think that those really were in play or something that people would be challenging. And so I can't say that I chose the office because I thought I would be on the front lines of defending those values. Lastly, I didn't think the office would be terribly controversial if handled appropriately. Um, and I thought that that was appealing. I'm not necessarily a truculent person by nature. Maybe I am now. Maybe it's changed me, but I appreciated the perhaps romanticized idea that I could keep all of my friends of all political stripes in this office, that nobody, however far left or however far right, would really have much an objection with the way I ran the office.
Cool. So there's been a lot written, and you've talked a lot about like what happened when you got into office. So we don't need to get into all of that. But I am curious. So you're sort of saying like you didn't necessarily get into this office because you wanted to be on the front lines of the pro-democracy movement. It came to you. But I'd love to hear a little bit about what your mindset was in terms of deciding to push back against a lot of the incoming that you had. I mean, president going after you, cyber ninjas, et cetera. And
Yeah,
I mean, a lot of like, I mean, partially what you're talking about here is that this was a road to getting more involved in Republican politics, and
yeah,
a lot of other Republicans and conservatives um, did not have not pushed back when met with the incoming that you were. And so I'm curious if you
yeah.
can speak a little bit to the why you decided, and if it was sort of a decision at the time.
Yeah. I, I didn't exactly like map this out on a whiteboard or really think it through or why I was doing this, but in the post hoc analysis of it, I would say it came down to two things, which is the first is that it wasn't an abstraction for me. It was very real in that members of my party were accusing people in my office and then me of doing unlawful things, of covering up fraud from the 2020 election, of undermining American democracy and American rule of law. And then some of those accusations turned into some real vileness directed at the men and women in my office who were doing just normal stuff, doing well at their jobs, and were good human beings. And so part of me is just I guess I have I have my breaking point, and I was tired of just hearing all of this and thinking that it might potentially blow over. So for the first 5 months in office, really through well, after the 2020 election. So really, it wasn't until about May of 2021 that I started pushing back much more publicly. And and that was something I didn't do with great enthusiasm because I knew that it would cause a further rift with my political party and me, but I was just so sick of them saying these horrible things without sort of any pushback. There was no one sticking up for us, so if I didn't say them, nobody was going to say them. And then, yeah, I guess my pride. Like there's only so long you can keep kicking me, and when I'm, keep kicking me and not expect me to fight back. And I think that this sort of there's an expectation, perhaps well ingrained, that you can do something as outrageous as call, like Ted Cruz. You can say that his grandfather killed JFK or something like that, and that his wife's ugly or whatever, and that he'll still line up behind you. And I guess that's just not baked into me. And then the other thing is, if I have one core sort of concept around things that I care about, or one motivating North Star for a lot of I've done is I care a lot about truth. I believe firmly that there is objective truth, and the lies that were being told were so about my office and about election administration broadly in the United States were so fanciful that I thought that they would be surely dismissed by the American public. But then just many people in that world kept repeating them, and I saw people being convinced by it, and that just I don't know, that just made me disgusted. And so that's something that I've found very satisfying throughout all of this, is that um, I think that we need, objective truth is important, and preserving that for history, preserving that for our sanity is something that's very satisfying. And so a lot of people will say, well, war on democracy, you're on the front lines of the war of democracy. And I've always likened it more to a proxy war, or one particular front in a much larger war on truth than on democracy. That democracy, yeah, was just, where it was particularly hot. And now I think we see things, well, certainly during the COVID time, we saw things that were just outright lies about some of the people involved in COVID and some of the measures that President Trump deployed during COVID. And then, now we see outright lies about all sorts of things. And a lot of people say, well, Stephen, like, are you really that Pollyannish? Did you just wake up? Like, politicians lie. That's been going on for a long time. And yes, I know that. But these lies were just, I thought, on a whole different level about stuff that was so fundamental to our our system of governance, so fundamental to society, that they weren't like, well, you said you supported minimum wage laws, but now you're saying you never supported minimum wage laws. I just view that as a very different type of lie than lying about like a major event, whether it was January 6th or whether it was the 2020 election. Um, and the fact that you sort of a rewriting of reality is happening was very disturbing to me.
Appreciate all that. So going off that for a second, like let's use sort of the proxy war on truth as, I mean, we can call it pro-democracy movement, we can call it proxy war on truth, but so you stood up for truth. You sort of, I mean, not the language you like, but we're sort of on the front lines for the war democracy. And um and I mean, this was a primary, but you lost your primary. And I'm curious, like what's your take now on um I mean, is standing up for the truth, and is like you're sort of lionized in the pro-democracy community, but is that a winning strategy, and why isn't it a winning strategy?
I don't know. Yeah, I don't know if it's. I think that I think there's a lot to suggest that it isn't, or but there's maybe you could say there's just not enough voices out there, and if not only I had said that, but 20 other elected Republicans in Arizona had started saying, guys, this is all nonsense at the exact same time, then maybe it would have been sufficient. I think there's a lot to be said if all major federal Republicans had said shortly after the 2020 election that like this is nonsense, or if everyone had said for more than just 1 week that January 6th was like a horrible day and it was an outrage, then maybe it would have been impactful. But I you know you can certainly make the case that it has had limited success in terms of public opinion polling on whether or not the 2020 election was stolen, whether or not falsehoods are shared at a more frequent rate. So I don't regret it. Um, I don't regret that. In May of 2021, I knew that I was perhaps writing my demise in Republican Party politics, at least for the short term period. That was something that I accepted. And when I look back at my time in office, don't regret that. Sometimes I wonder if my approach could have been more effective in terms of how I spoke to people, what I said about it, if I should have been softer, gentler during the whole time, and if that could have persuaded more people, then at certain points I developed a little bit of a hardened edge fighter. Let me show you the 22 reasons why you're wrong, rather than let me empathize with you and let me bring you in and let me try to be as kind and gentle as possible while explaining this.
So I think you become someone that's become very immersed in pro-democracy spaces in ways that you probably wouldn't have thought would have happened when you started the job. It sounds like, what would you describe as the pro-democracy space right now? How would you define it, and how does it exist right now?
People who will push down whatever their ordinary political preferences are regarding a whole matter of topics ranging from, for me, regulatory taxation, et cetera, and will give primacy to, I would say, just core facets of American democracy, free and fair elections, peaceful transfer of power, the rule of law and the abiding by judicial decisions, a free press, that I believe there's evidence to suggest that those are all suffering and under attack and maybe even in decline, according to at least some statistics, such as the VDEM score and certainly a number of political pundits. And so the people who are first identifying as the broad system that we've had in place, the liberal democracy with a small l, liberal democracy, is the most important thing to me. And if that's in place, then we can talk about, hey, do you believe that, we should get rid of the capital gains tax or something like that? Maybe some of the differences that would have defined my political squabbles maybe in 2010 or something like that, when I was 2012 going around campaigning for Mitt Romney or something like that. And so that's how I would characterize those people, the people that are very engaged in the pro-democracy movement.
Which is not the vast majority of Americans, probably, right?
No, the vast majority of the Americans still definitely weren't voting on whether they thought there were systemic risks to our form of government and a liberal democracy. That was probably the primary motivation for around 10%
Hmm.
of American voters. And if you listen to most of the exit polling and the political pundits, certainly the price of eggs and the border were things that the average American was thinking about more.
So given that, and I'm taking it back to like sort of your reflections on how you could have been more effective and I don't know, like more I don't know if it's empathetic or tolerant or whatever. But like what do you think, given that the pro-democracy space is small, I mean, like what can or should it be doing differently right now? What's not working? Is it like should people be I mean, are people actually ever going to care about democracy as a first issue, or is it making sure that the right candidates actually do care about the price of eggs? Like what can the actual
Yeah.
movement be doing differently?
Well, I keep thinking that there would be a line in the sand but each time that keeps getting blurred over. And so certainly January 6th was the most obvious line in the sand that I would have said. I would have thought people would say, hey, I'm team red, team Republican, ride or die, but like this is too far. And so the Nixon example stands as a stark contrast when it was the DOJ, it was elder statesmen within the Republican Party who it was Barry Goldwater who said, the jig is up. This is too far, and even though you're a president of the same political party that I am, this goes past that. So I still think that there will be some lines in the sand that would make the average American think that, like, oh my goodness, this is now the most important thing in the country, such as if the military got weaponized against American citizens, or to start imposing law, or we just had tanks in the streets like many Latin American country has had historically. But short of that, I think that the pro-democracy movement needs to figure out its messaging better, and I think it needs to talk more. And I still think that a lot of people are carrying on as if it's just politics as usual, and are not making this the prime focus. But at the same time, we need to separate some of that messaging from just messaging that either people on the political left like to talk about, or just I don't like Donald Trump, so therefore I'm going to criticize him for everything. Because I do think that there's a decent amount of eye rolling from the average American if you consistently say democracy is under attack, or we have a constitutional crisis every single day. And so when I'm thinking about how to talk about it in the context of the first few weeks of the Trump presidency, I don't think that things like perhaps the unlawful termination of contracts to through USAID to foreign entities like that's not going to be. But hey, there were people on January 6th who beat up cops and then for political reasons, they got pardoned. Hey, Mayor Eric Adams was charged and was almost certainly going to be convicted of fraud, of bribery, of taking illegal campaign dollars. But because of his political position, he got to play by a different set of rules. Or, hey, we've turned into this, or we're starting to see signs of a quasi oligarchy where if everything, lots of things are being cut, but if you court favor with the president, then you too could get a contract for $400 million worth of armored Tesla cyber trucks. And so I think we need to be judicious and we need to study what actually resonates with Americans. And then we need to let them know when those things are happening, and we need to remind them that those things are happening because there will be some wins from the Trump administration that might be paired with some things that we wouldn't have thought um, that a president would ever do in terms of potentially unlawful behavior. And uh, so it would be easy to just blur that all together and say, hey, I'm actually pretty okay with what's come out of the administration.
Democrats, by and large, are not going to espouse your policy preferences, but by and large, the the attacks on democracy seem to be coming from the right and Republicans, and how you balance um not seeing like Democrats as the only party of democracy and sort of like the party line of this is a fight for democracy with the fact that you're a disaffected Republican. Does that make sense? How do you like see your role right now?
Well, I'm a firm believer in the horseshoe theory, and certainly, especially over the last few years, where I think the Democrats certainly have elements of their party that are burn it all down and are illiberal in their approach, especially with respect to speech and with respect to business rights. But we see a lot of weird alliances right now. I think it was Senator Hawley and Senator Sanders were going to pair up to cap the amount of interest that credit cards could be charging. And so we are seeing an interesting realignment. But the difference right now is that I think ultimately the Democratic Party is still controlled by, I guess I would say, the strands of the Clinton Democrats that really took power in the 1990s, whereas the Republican Party has been wrestled away from the longtime Republicans and passed over to the new right, the illiberal Trump right. Illiberalism comes in all strands, and maybe has probably come more on the left in the likes of a Bolshevik Russia, a socialist Castro. I think I can think of two of those for every one Pinochet. But I think that again, just more important than some other public matters of public policy are just having those broad strokes in place. And I ally with anyone who agrees on those broad strokes right now, even if we have different politics when it comes to public policy.
How do you I think that that's actually probably a messaging like what you just said, that liberalism has happened more on the left, so it's not just it's seen as that's something that can be pushed across more. But what do you think should be some of the strategies? Because a lot of what you're saying is, and thinking about the line of sands and thinking about the like, is you do need more folks on the right now to stand up. What are strategies that you can think of to actually, I mean, you talked about collective action. Some of this is a collective action problem in the sense of like you could have been like, well,
Yeah,
like
I think it is
I'm
the
not going to do
ultimate
it.
collective action problem. Or
Yeah,
not the ultimate, but I think it is a very serious collective
yeah,
action problem. And if every single person, elected official on the Republican right over the last 5 years can tell you that there have been plenty of people who have said, this is not my cup of tea. I wish this would all go away. This is nonsense. But if anyone who sticks their neck out, it just gets whacked off immediately. Either they get targeted online, or if they get um, primaried. Even if you just think about it for a little bit, like somebody like Tim Reynolds in Iowa, you immediately the mob is sicked after you. And so I don't know, other than trying to provide more cover fire, more space for those people to step out and do the right thing when the time comes.
I mean, part of this would be, is there more support that you could have needed or used? I guess a broader question beyond you would be, are there ways that, especially for folks on the right that are standing up or doing the right thing, is there a way to be more supportive of them?
I, the most frustrating thing to me was the number of higher profile elected Republicans or former elected Republicans who privately would sing my praises, thank me for doing the right thing, but then wouldn't say a darn thing publicly, or would even endorse um, some of the people who were my detractors, or saying the very things that they told me that were repugnant to them in private.
Do you think that there's some, I mean, this is just conjecturing a little bit, but with some of this is a little bit of the, because I'm like, maybe this is like door two you could have gone down in your career, but a little bit of the, I will say when I need to say to stay in office because whoever follows me might be worse.
Yeah, I do think that there's a lot of that. I think there's um, a lot of the justifications that I usually hear are either one, look, this is a peccadillo and it's not that big of a deal in the grand scheme, and like who cares? Like Donald Trump's not in office, went after the 2020 election, like power transferred, like who cares if he keeps saying this? Like it's important for me to go along with it because I want to accomplish this thing. And you and I, Stephen, both agree that this thing is a good thing. Or there's the argument that you just made, which is, look, I'm going to say this because you need him to appoint people like me. Otherwise, you're going to get appoint like a bunch of nut jobs, and we don't want nut jobs running the country. And then the other one that I hear a lot of is that, this is the Flight 93 election, and that the left has become so awful that even if you don't like some of these lies, and even if you don't like Donald Trump's personality, he is the perhaps ugly weapon that has proven effective at bashing back the illiberal and barbaric forces of the left. And I honestly have some appetite for that. I'm nowhere near as pessimistic about the left and the Democratic Party as the people who say this, but I do think that there are ways in which, like the left has been awful, and I have some sympathy for people who just want to beat them. But ultimately, I just don't think it can you can that takes you down a lot of perilous paths, and if you can't square it with your own moral code.
Do you think it would be helpful if more folks on the left, as part of the pro-democracy space, called out when the left Democrats Biden
Yes,
administration?
yes, yes. I think it would have been very helpful if all the left had said, like, no, that's an abuse of the pardon process and undermines the rule of law. And I think I hate when the left is like this guy who killed somebody in a train in self-defense in New York, and
In the subway, yeah.
the
Yeah.
left said, well, that's just because you have corrupt juries and a corrupt judge. And it's like, okay, well, that's what they're saying about the New York case that convicted Donald Trump on 32 counts, 32 felonies. And so, it becomes harder to say, oh, you should abide by our court system, our rule of law, which, yeah, occasionally gets it wrong, but on the whole is a very good system and is something that we need to have in place.
Why you still stay in this work given everything going on? But like, we can.
Oh, because I believe that this is a moment in history. I believe it's a moment in American history. I believe and because of the outsized influence that the United States plays, it's a moment of world history. And it's been incredibly meaningful to me to play a part in something that I think is very much for the betterment of society, because I so firmly believe that if you have the basic pillars of a representative democracy, rule of law, and a market economy, that human flourishing happens naturally. And the United States, more than any country in the history of the world, has been the ambassador of those three values. And I hope that we can continue to be the ambassador of those three values and that they aren't supplanted by a China model or a Russia model, which I think leads to human suffering.